Nolan Wells bombshell. A witness tells us tonight, I went with Nolan's mother to the coroner's office, and this is what I saw. Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us. Nolan is dead.
Could it be a decompositional change? Could it be something else like blunt force injury? It's hard to say at this point in time.
I find it very difficult to believe, Dr. Kendall Crowns, that not one, but two medical examiners cannot figure out why he had deep red subcutaneous markings. Joining us tonight, an all-star panel, but first straight to a special guest, Josh Gill with the Cajun Navy, who, as you know, searched for Nolan's body. Josh, thank you for being with us. The
morning, ma'am.
Day unfolded when Nolan's body was found very bizarrely. You were there. I'm going to get to your trip to the coroner's office along with the family, but I want you to start at the beginning. What happened at the beginning of that day? We believe that Nolan likely died on July the 4th. Let's start with the day that Nolan's body was found and that you ended up at the coroner's office. Start at the beginning.
So early that morning, I deployed some resources. I deployed an aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft that wheels up at 0635, as you can see right there from the photographs. I was on my way to the Lake Mars boat launch. That's where the Tactical Operations Center was set up. And I received a phone call. Received that phone call from the Sheriff's Department that a body had been found. Didn't say who it was. I was probably 15 minutes out from the location. I then received a phone call within minutes after the conversation from the sheriff's office from Nolan's mother, Christine, and she was frantic. That mother's intuition, she knew what was going on. So I'm meeting at the boat launch. I was there about 15 minutes ahead of time. Had
Hold on
conversations
just
with
one
the
moment.
sheriff.
Hold on. For those of you just joining us,
Yep.
Josh Gill is with us. He is the United Cajun Navy Incident Commander in the search for Nolan Wells. You stated that you received a phone call from Nolan's mother, Christine. You said she was frantic. What was she saying?
So again, I'm going to paraphrase. She said that they had found him, that they had found a body. My biggest concern at that exact moment was to make sure that she was safe, that she had, a safe way to get there, because it was the beginning of what's more than likely to be the worst day of her life. Again, so continuing
Hold on. Josh, you got me drinking from the fire hydrant here. Every word you're saying sparks 100 questions. So,
Sure.
Nolan Wells' mother calls you, okay? Where was she when she called?
She was en route to the boat launch as well. We were meeting there
Okay.
For the search.
Okay. Had she been told that a body had been found?
Yet when she called me, so we had earlier communication, but via text, when she called me, she told me that a body had been found. She had been notified by the Sheriff's Department.
Oh, gosh. No wonder she was frantic. So she calls you. She's just been told by the sheriff a body has been found. She calls you. You're going to the boat launch. What boat launch? Where?
That's the Lake Mars boat launch.
Why there?
So that's where the operation was set up. That's where the search operations, the Tactical Operations Center was there. They had a mobile command unit, and the multiple entities and agencies were basing their operations out of there. So what it is a boat launch. Again, they could launch rather quickly. It's a protected area to launch and then make that run to Horn Island and the surrounding areas.
Okay, so you agreed with her. Did she ask you to meet at the boat launch?
Oh, she knew I was going to that boat launch, and she actually asked me that morning, early that morning, where we were going to meet. And I told her, here's the best place. Here's where the operation is beginning.
Okay.
It was a secured location by the sheriff's department. So, that's where they were running their operation on. And that's a common practice.
Question: do you know why Nolan's mother wanted you to go with her to Horn Island?
So we had communication. She called me, literally called me. We had a voice conversation that Sunday morning, about 7 o'clock, 7:30. She had called and asked for some assistance. After that phone call, I asked to memorialize all of our conversations so I could go back and look at information. And that's not
What
uncommon for
kind of
families to
assistance
call
did
us
she
and ask
need?
us, find my son. There it
So
is.
she asked you to help find her son. That assistance. Okay, got it. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, so she asked for that assistance, find my son, find Nolan. Started gathering information on who he is, who he was with, where he was. She made it very clear that he was with some friends, that they had been on Horn Island. So then I start launching resources immediately. And then
Okay,
after I
hold on
launched the
right there.
resources, I
Hold
start.
on.
Yep,
Josh, what
yep.
specifically did she say about him going to Horn Island with friends, if you can recall?
So she said that he went to Horn Island with friends. It's July 4th, and Horn Island's a location that's well known and well visited by people partying and hanging out for July 4th. It's a huge boating community, and that was the location where boats congregate and enjoy the 4th.
Okay, so she says he went to Horn Island on the 4th with friends. Got it. Okay. So you meet at the boat ramp. And when you first saw her, what was her demeanor?
So she came to me. She gets out of the vehicle, comes to me, gives me a big hug. Um, Again, it's a mother who her intuition is that her body was just found. So obviously sad.
According to what we
And
learned, the moment she gets out of the vehicle, she runs straight to you and is hyperventilating.
absolutely, she came straight to
What
me. I mean,
happened?
20 people. She gives me a big hug and starts crying. And look, I'm a softie. I started crying with her, and we literally sat in the parking lot on the ground in the gravel for probably 15 minutes. And we had some pretty deep discussions. She cried. I cried with her, and her husband was there as well. And I want to say this, that he's a very stoic individual, and he stood there with his hand on both of our shoulders and was a part of everything. It was one of those moments you don't forget.
What was she saying? What was she saying? I mean, in a moment like that, how do you console a mother, Josh, that has been told by this disembodied voice on the phone, we found a body? I mean, what was she saying? Did she not want to believe it was Nolan? Did she believe it was Nolan? At this point, she had not ID'd a body yet. Nobody had identified that this was Nolan. Was she holding out hope? What was going on?
She knew. Again, mother's intuition is strong. It's very strong. In her heart, she knew. As far as what she was saying, why is always the question, Um, she asked God, why? And the rest of the conversations were just, memories real quick. And I'm assuming everything was just flashing in front of her eyes because, again, it's the beginning of the hardest time of her life. I'm losing her son. I would say just to console her and to help anyone I possibly could.
What was the dad saying, if anything?
He was again, he was really quiet. He was a quiet gentleman, but his physical presence afforded her, made her feel safe. And I will say that, he stood there with us, on the ground. He's there. And his presence said a lot, and it meant a lot to his wife, to Miss Christine. And again, that's a tough time for him as well.
So she's crying. You state that she knows deep inside that that body is her boy, her son. You start crying. Did you remain standing in the parking lot or did you sit down?
No, ma'am. Like I said, when she first came to me, she gave me a big hug, and I wrapped my arms around her, and we sat down. We sat very quickly. We remained seating for quite some time to have that discussion, say
On
a
the
prayer. I
parking
did pray
lot?
with her right there. Yes, ma'am. On the ground in the gravel.
Y'all were
Right.
sitting on the, and you said she was hyperventilating. You sit on the ground. I believe I heard you say that you started praying.
Always. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Was she
And the prayer.
praying that it wasn't Nolan?
So, and again, I'm paraphrasing and going from the best of my memory. Um, it was more of a prayer for peace and comfort is what I did. And I always ask for that and then for answers, and I prayed Godspeed if it is Nolan, and, for the Lord to put his protecting hands over us and everything that we do, and to be with this family and this mother, especially during these hard times. It's an emotional time.
I cannot even imagine. I'm trying to get my head around the picture of you and Miss Christine sitting on the ground in a parking lot with her crying after just been told we found a body, and she knows it's Nolan.
Well, sure.
I thank God that you were there. I thank God that you and Nolan's dad were there to help her. I don't know how she even stood up. How did you get her to stand up?
So it was about 15 minutes we were there on the ground, and a couple times the sheriff came up and he saw what was going on, and the sheriff's staff, and they understood that it was one of those moments where we need some space. She finally, and I hate to say she called her composure because it was an emotional time for me as well as the father, and we stood up and the sheriff came over and, he started
Did you
discussing what the
help her
process
up?
would be. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
I don't know
Yes,
how she even stood up.
by the
Okay, so
grace of
you help
God.
her up off the ground. Yeah. Okay, then what happens?
So a family and friends started to arrive, and the security let them in, and the sheriff came up, and the sheriff again, um, he had to help deliver that news, that a body was found, and do his formal, and I hate to say notification because at this point he didn't say if it was Nolan or not, um, but he explained that a body was found and where they would be bringing that body to. Um, and from there, the family gathered, and it was, I'd say, a matter of 15, 20 minutes, maybe. We were then escorted. Christine asked me to accompany them to the coroner's office, which I was extremely honored to do so. And then the sheriff's department escorted us to that coroner's office.
Can I ask you something, Josh? When the sheriff came over, was it the sheriff or a deputy sheriff?
It was the sheriff.
The sheriff.
He was,
He comes over
yes, ma'am.
and formally tells her what she was already told on the phone. A body has been found. Had the body already been taken to the coroner's office?
It was en route. So he was en route to the coroner's office, and he told us, he told Christine, um, here's what's going on. Here's where you need to go for further information. And again, extremely professional, extremely polite. And the biggest word I can use was he was compassionate. His staff was extremely compassionate. I can't take that
How
away
was
from him.
she at that moment? Was she just numb? Did she ask questions, or did she just stand there and take it? What was her response to the sheriff coming over face to face telling her we found a body? Because, a lot of times, this from all of the bodies that you have helped recover. Guys, joining me is Josh Gill. He's our special guest tonight with the United Cajun Navy. He's the incident commander, and he was in on the search for Nolan from the beginning, and he went to the coroner's office along with the family, along with the mother and the father. So when the sheriff was, I guess, formally delivering this to her, a lot of people, when they hear it on the phone, they don't want to believe it. I didn't when it happened to me. I thought, did I get that wrong? So he comes up and tells her to her face, and there's no way to mistake what he's saying. He's right there in front of her. How did Miss Christine respond?
Just as any parent would respond. Tears, shock, disbelief, I think are some good words. But again, I don't want to take away from the compassion and the professionalism of the sheriff's department at that point. And there were more people coming up, right? And at that point, the sheriff had conversation with the mother again, and the family, and just explained the process on what was going to happen next as far as where Nolan was going, and then moving from there. But I do want to add that, during these conversations, I reiterated to the mother and, Mr. Elmore, that Nolan will be treated with the utmost dignity and respect through the process. I wanted to explain that because that's something that parents always need to hear. Family members, that their loved one will be treated with dignity and respect.
So you guys make it to the coroner's office. What happens when you get to the coroner's office and Nolan's body is already there?
Correct. So we go to the coroner's office, we sit down. The coroner, he comes in, rather quickly, 10, 15 seconds once the table was filled with all the people, family members, friends, myself.
What table? Were you in a conference room?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. A conference
Oh
room
gosh,
table.
at the medical examiners or coroners, everything is so sterile. And everyone I've
So
ever been to.
So this was like an office conference room. You walked right in the door, and there it was. Didn't really have that feeling of a coroner's office, if that's fair to say. More like a business office conference room. Um, he walks in, very polite gentleman, very professional, well spoken, soft spoken as well, and basically said that they found a body, and from initial appearance, he identified him as Nolan. He did want to take a DNA swab or get a DNA sample from the family just for further confirmation and for, I guess, record keeping, whatever it was. But then he also she asked about the condition, and he went into there were no immediate signs of foul play. Okay. To me, again, my opinion in hearing this is, no signs of blunt force trauma, or any I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, any signs of foul play, what we would consider that.
Well, I guess they hadn't seen that big red mark on the back of his occipital yet, underneath the skin. And I take it at this juncture, Josh, his throat had not been dissected to look for potential subcutaneous bruising. So
Sure.
you're telling me that from a cursory look at Nolan Wells's body, there was no sign of foul play, such as a stab wound or a bullet wound or bruises, deep gouges on the head. That, in my experience, having tried so many homicide cases, I cannot count them, is what you get from a cursory look at a body. Would you agree?
So, correct. I'm not a medical examiner nor a coroner. I have gathered information and heard multiple people speak on that, especially about the red spot, right? We'll quote unquote call it the red spot. And as I appreciate that may be pooling or whatever, it could possibly be cellular decomposition. Again, I'm not a medical examiner or a coroner, but I do know what the coroner said at that first meeting with him.
Let's get back to what happened in that conference room. So you're there, the mom's there, the dad's there, the coroner comes in, very calm, very soft-spoken, and tells Miss Christine that he believes it's Nolan based on physical appearance and description. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
What was her reaction? Because if it were me,
Again,
I would have been holding out. It's not him. It's not him. It's somebody that looks like him. I don't believe it's him. He's out there. If I can just get out of here, I can go find him. What was her reaction?
again, it was quiet and it was a very emotional time for the family as well. I personally believe at that point she accepted that it was him. Um,
Why do you say
and
that?
started,
You must have observed
um,
something that makes you say that.
again, it just actions, and not denial, not beating on the table. It's not him. It's not him. Let's go. Let's keep looking. Um, and her being in the medical profession as well as I believe, a nurse practitioner. I think I will never say the word accept. She understood that what was being told to her. Right. Yeah. Again, I'm
Was
not a
she still
parent.
crying?
I don't have any. Absolutely. She still cries to this day. And look, so I want to make this very clear to everybody that I support Christine in what she's doing. There's not a playbook that's written for a grieving mother who doesn't know what happened to her son. And I truly hope and pray every day,
Same.
as well as my organization does, that she finds peace and comfort and she's able to accept
And you know what else, Josh?
whatever the results are.
I don't know
Yes.
how this would have unfolded if it had not been for the United Cajun Navy. I'm just putting that out there. For some reason, y'all have been
Thank you.
gotten so much hate, but you guys were out there at the get-go. You're the one that went with Miss Christine to the coroner's office. You were there. You're the one that helped her stand up off the ground when she was sitting on that pavement crying. That was you, United Cajun Navy.
Yes, ma'am.
I support her too, and my fondest dream is that we find out that this was an accident. But until we get to that point, this investigation must go on. So he comes in and tells her that. Then what happens?
So there were some questions, right? He asked the family if there was anything they needed to know. And I asked a question. And the question I asked was, can you please explain the process on where Nolan's going to go, what's going to happen from there? And he did. He explained that he would be going to the crime lab, I believe it was, on what was going on for further autopsy. Again, and I'm paraphrasing this. And we all understood it. We understood that what was going to happen, where it was going, and what would happen from there. Again, and I have to say this and reiterate this, that the family um, was in shock. I mean, it's horrible news to receive. I can't imagine it. I'm an empath, and I still can't possibly imagine how it feels to receive that information that your son is no longer, here or with the family, no matter what the outcome is. Um, here's the issue, though, is that we have to be prepared to accept and understand what's told to us as far as results of the grand jury or whatever it is. I want to make sure that people understand the prayers for peace and comfort are there daily for this family as well as the nation, because this is a hard time for the nation and Ocean Springs in particular.
What happened then? You asked about the procedure. Let me make sure I understand this. The coroner identified Nolan based on description, because I've seen a photo, which we have not shown, of Nolan's body where it washed up. Well, I say washed up. That's really a term of art. I don't know that he washed up. I don't know how his body got right there, because it seems to me it was half in the sand and half in the water, right? So I don't know how it got there. That said, he made this ID based on the description given to him of Nolan, but wasn't the actual ID made from dental records?
So I don't know. I don't know what the actual ID was made from, if it was from dental records or if it was a DNA swab. He did discuss collecting DNA with the mother before we left. I did not
Were you
witness
there
that. I
when the
did not
DNA was
see.
collected?
I was not. I don't know how they caught it, how they got it. But it was a discussion. But again, the coroner was confident, and his confidence level was high that was Nolan. And I think that's what Miss Christine wanted to do, or wanted to understand. And the reason being, I think that there's that professional courtesy of, understanding he's a coroner. She is a nurse practitioner, and he wouldn't tell her those things if it was not in his heart.
And as I move forward in the questioning of Josh Gill, incident commander at United Cajun Navy, with Miss Christine Nolan's mother at the time she was taken to the coroner's office. Dave Mack, Crime Stories investigative reporter, very quickly, wasn't Nolan identified through dental records? That's a yes, no, please.
Yes, ma'am. He was identified with dental records.
To Jeff Gentry joining us. Jeff, thank you for waiting so patiently. Forensic certified bloodstain pattern analyst, crime scene analyst, death investigator, author of Forensic Science. Jeff, why did they have to use dental records to identify Nolan Wells's body?
Nancy, usually dental records are used when other forms of identification cannot be utilized. So the first thing that we always try to do is to visually identify somebody. And if you have family there or friends or an ID, something to reference to visually identify the person, then that is the first step. So just getting a general idea of who they are. Then you want to move to a scientific form of identification. And that is something based on a scientific discipline. So there is proof that it is the person when it goes to court or additional questions are asked later. Your first form of scientific identification is fingerprints. That's always going to be the easiest and fastest. And if he had an ID or driver's license, then there should be a fingerprint on file to be able to identify this person rather quickly. However, in this case, if he had been deceased for a day or two before he was found, then forms of scientific identification like fingerprints or even like a visual identification may not necessarily be available. So in those scenarios, then you move to alternate forms of identification like dental records. So that you would have to get the person's dental records from when they were alive to compare them against dental records taken when they're deceased at the autopsy. The last form of identification that's used, which is the most expensive and most time consuming, would be DNA. However, if you're going to take this case to court and it's going to be tried like a homicide, then you would probably want to use a form of identification like DNA because it's much more solid. You can verify with percentages how likely it is that the person is who you believe they are. So that's why dental records were most likely used in this case versus something simple and fast like fingerprints or visual identification.
Jeff Gentry can be found at evidenceoverassumption.com. Jeff, my takeaway from what you just said is they could not make a visual identification and they could not use fingerprints. You said those were the first two choices, then dental, then DNA. Why would they not be able to make a visual ID?
I'm assuming because he was outside and in the elements for a day or so. It's hot, it's July, it's very warm weather. However, in most cases where I have seen drownings where the person is underwater for a period of time, their body is pretty well preserved, unless we're talking about like multiple days, weeks that this person is underwater. Usually the water is cooler temperature, and if that person is face down in the water or completely submerged, their body is pretty well preserved until they surface. Usually a body after a couple of days surfaces. So I'm really surprised that he was on the shore. I've never personally investigated a drowning case where a person just ends up on the shore, especially if there's not a strong current or waves. Usually in bodies of water, the person will stay in pretty much the location where they go underwater if it's witnessed. They don't usually move around much after they have submerged or gone underwater. So to me, it's very concerning that he was on the shore or that his body surfaced that quickly. But that's what I am guessing is why they couldn't do an immediate visual identification with the family or even fingerprints. So I would really like to know more about the condition of the body. That's what I am assessing as a death investigator when I respond to a scene. So there should be a death investigation report from a death investigator who has experience looking at bodies and has experience examining these type of things to show exactly what his condition was when he was found. And if the body is decomposed more than what you would normally expect in a drowning case, that should be a big red flag. That's something that you definitely need to look into further.
So you're saying, let me follow up on what you just said. You find it odd that he was quasi on the shore. You also stated that location where the body is found is typically where they went under. You also said that the body must have been too decomposed to make a facial ID. I did not hear an explanation as to why fingerprint ID was impossible.
Fingerprint identification would be impossible if the hands were dried out to an extent where they can't be fingerprinted. Sometimes people that are underwater, or if the hands are underwater, the skin, just like if you're in the bathtub for a prolonged period of time, the skin ends up looking the same way. It just gets kind of wrinkled, and it's very hard to get a usable or workable fingerprint in those scenarios. So one scenario would be the body is too decomposed to get a fingerprint or a visual identification. And then the alternate scenario is the body or the hands were exposed to the water too long to where they just are not able to get a good workable print. So those are the different possibilities. But again, his position at the edge of the bank or partially in the water, that's really concerning because there's tons of people around that area. If he was in that position or on the shore decomposing for a day or so, why did nobody see him? Those would be my type of questions that I would ask if I were a death investigator responding to this scene.
Jeff, I'm looking right now at the photo of his body. And it's about, the beach is flat, and I would say it's about 3 to 4 feet from where there's nothing but sand, no water. It looks like it's at just as the water is starting, like you could walk in it very easily and your ankles may not even get wet. He's not out in the water at all. He's on the beach and on wet sand. That's the way to put it. It's wet sand. He's not out in the water, Jeff Gentry. What does that mean, if anything?
That's really abnormal. I would have a ton of questions in that case. I would wonder if there's no waves, no strong current, why is that body up on a shore? How did it get there? And just like when we're looking at blood evidence or other forms of evidence, if something is in a certain position within a scene, you have to question how it got there. I have investigated a lot of deaths, bodies in canals, rivers, lakes, large bodies of water, never really near the ocean to where you would expect somebody to wash up to shore. But in these cases, even though there's strong current, waves, large bodies of water, I've never really seen bodies up on a shore, especially up out of the water enough to where they could decompose significantly to where they can't be identified or can't be fingerprinted. So that would be a very big question that I would have in this case is, with the absence of waves, with the absence of a strong current, how in the world did this 19-year-old man end up on shore out of the water?
Josh, I'm going to pick back up with you and Nolan's family at the coroner's office, but you disagree with Jeff's characteristic. Explain.
Wind, wave, tides, currents. If you look, there's also there's some pictures, some aerial pictures that show driftwood way on the beach. Those four things are what impacted, as I appreciate, where Nolan ultimately ended up. If you look in one of those pictures, ma'am, a wave is about to come right over and crest right near where the body's at. So that shows that there is some wave actions and some currents. The winds, the waves, the tides, the currents have a huge impact on anything that's put into that water. It's known as the washing machine. It's a high tide, high current area. So that's that was the first things that I looked at whenever I saw that picture, and that is one of those pictures that I showed to the sheriff immediately as I received it. The stuff that's dark in that picture right there, I believe that's debris, and that debris could have easily or was washed up on that island. And if you look at the picture as well into the water, the white is that's wave action, either from wind, tides, or currents. So, and it's going towards the beach. When you walk down the beach and you find shells and you find, the bottle with a message in it, it gets washed up on the beach.
Okay, so I think in simple terms, you're saying you believe the body was washed up from the water to that location. Okay, and Gentry is saying typically a body is found where it goes in the water. So you're right. Tidal experts, water experts will have to determine that. I want to get back to you at the coroner's office. A dental exam was used to make the ID, which leads me to another question. If his face and his fingertips were so decomposed that they can't make an ID, then how do they know there was not bruising or there was not skin marks on his face, on his hands? That's a whole nother thing. You're not a medical examiner. I get it. But that's a question that needs to be answered back to you. The family, Miss Christine, the dad, were asked to provide DNA. Okay. You did not see the DNA taken, probably a buccal swab. What happened then?
So if I may add one thing, is I think that'd be a great question to ask the
Sure.
coroner is, how did he identify? Because he was pretty sure, in his best professional opinion, that was Nolan. And maybe maybe he wanted the dental records just out of professionalism.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, isn't that one of the most definite ways to identify? Sure, and out of courtesy to the family, let's do it the easy way for you as well as to get the dental records. So moving forward, ma'am, we left. We went to the house. There was a gathering at the house, and the people started to pour in, and it was a very emotional time. Again, the family, the friends and family that were there they were extremely welcoming to myself. Todd Terrell also came he came within, I don't know, 30 minutes. We stayed there for about 30 minutes. We had conversation with the mother, Mr. Elmore, and some of the other family members and discussed a couple things with them. GoFundMe being one of them. And we wanted to assist with that as far as the development and helping to spread the word on that piece, as well as offer our services, and anything that we could possibly do to assist this family in this time of grief. We're there for them. Still there today. Anything that they possibly need, we're here to provide. If it's a shoulder to cry on, we're there. If she wants to get in an airplane or if she wants to get in a boat and go back out to Horn Island, we're there. We got it for her. She's been offered those services. We just want her to know and the family to know that we're there. We're 110% supportive because, again, there's no playbook on how to grieve the loss of a child.
Time when you were at Nolan's home after leaving the coroner's office with the family, was there any concern that there had been foul play?
It really didn't come up. It just didn't come up. I think that whole grieving process and it hit her hard when they got back to the house. At what point did potential foul play or the thoughts of foul play or the accusations come into mind? I don't know.
I think you're probably right that at that time she walks in, Josh, and she comes into a home where she knows her son will never be back in his room ever again. And when you see all the relatives and neighbors come in, it gets real. It's real.
It does.
And the pictures of Nolan are still out. I mean, all the family photos are there, and I don't know when it hits you that that's all you have going forward. That's it. Photos and memories. Photos and memories.
So, ma'am, if I can say one thing.
Please do.
I hear the emotion in your voice, right? I can hear it in your voice, and that's a sympathetic emotion for that mother, knowing that she has, at that point when she walked through that door, it became real, and it became the hardest day, the beginning of the hardest time of her life. Again, I pray every day for the peace and comfort. But ma'am, seeing that coming from you, and understanding the emotion behind it and what this lady's going through and what this family's going through and what the community's going through, it's very important. It's important to know that there's a lot of people that are extremely upset and they lost a community member who was loved and cherished. So, it's a tough time for everybody.
Josh, did you speak with Nolan's mother again after that day?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We've had numerous conversations.
Regarding?
And so we had conversation about forensic pathologist, a secondary forensic pathologist. She wanted one. I gave her a recommendation that I got from somebody. She also discussed an attorney. She sent those messages as well. But the majority of our conversations, man, to be honest with you, were I'd send something to her, keep your chin up and your chest out and just know that you've got a lot of people that love and support you. I wanted to give her words of encouragement because I know how important that is to a family, but also let her know that if there's any questions that she has, that I could possibly take some of that weight off of her shoulders or off of her family's shoulders to help assist, that I'll do it for her. And we're here for her.
Did she have questions?
It's not really, because she got an attorney rather quickly, which is fine, whatever, that's on them. Again, the conversation turned into, very cordial. Thank you. Thanks for the prayers. Now, we did have a conversation at one point, ma'am, about another young man that I was looking for, Jadarius Manyweather, and I brought her up to speed on that case. And she said, and she told me explicitly, please give the prayers, our prayers to the family of Jadarius, which that was very important as well, because as a grieving mother, she wanted to express her concern and her prayers to another family who lost a young child.
The only question we have is, what happened to our son? A mother said that standing in front of national news cameras, months after her 18-year-old was pulled from a Mississippi beach that 300 people had been standing on that same afternoon. 300 witnesses. And somewhere in that crowd, roughly 90 minutes of that boy's life simply disappears. No footage covers it. No phone record fills the gap. Nobody can agree on where he was standing, who he was with, or when they last saw him breathing. And when his body finally surfaced, it wasn't out in open water the way you'd expect from a drowning. It was resting on dry sand, on an island where, according to public records, nobody has drowned in over 6 years. What follows involves a body examined twice by 2 different doctors who couldn't agree on what killed him, a recording that turned lifelong friends into accused men overnight, and threats serious enough to bring in federal charges against people who weren't even there the day it happened. This case includes real grief and disturbing forensic detail, so if that's not something you're prepared to sit with right now, this one might not be for you. For everyone else, stay close, because almost nothing you think you already know about this case is the full story. Welcome back if this channel is part of your routine, and welcome if you just found us. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And to everyone who's liked, shared, or commented on the cases we've covered before, thank you. You're the reason these stories keep reaching people who'd otherwise never hear them. Somewhere in the recording of his friend's final call for help, someone allegedly asks 3 words that would follow this case for months. Is he dead? We'll get to that call, but first you need to understand what was actually lost on Horn Island, Mississippi on the 4th of July. If you want every angle of this case, not just the parts that went viral, subscribe now. We're not skipping anything. Nolan Wells was 18, a 2025 graduate of Ocean Springs High School, a multi-sport athlete, a wide receiver good enough to sign with Southwest Mississippi Community College, alongside 3 of his own high school teammates. His coach called him a player who led by example. He wasn't just another name on the roster either. His coach said Wells helped recruit several of those same teammates himself, the kind of player a program gets built around. Even now, his seat during summer film sessions sits empty, left that way on purpose. His mother remembers something quieter, a protective kid with a running supply of jokes, so corny they became a family joke of their own. By the night of July 4th, he had not come home. Not to his mother, not to anyone, not to the friends who'd been beside him just hours earlier. Rewind 24 hours, and none of that seemed possible. On July 3rd, Nolan cooked dinner for his parents. Before he left for a friend's house, he hugged his mother and told her, "Hey Mom, I'm about to go. I love you." She had no reason to think twice about it. He was heading into his final summer before college football, and the trip to Horn Island with friends he'd known since freshman year was supposed to be one last hurrah before real life started. It never got that far. What happened between that goodbye and the moment his mother realized he was gone would take 2 days, a search team, and a discovery no family is ever prepared for. And it would leave more questions than anyone in Ocean Springs was ready to answer. At 9:56 a.m. on July 4th, a boat pulled away from a private dock near Ocean Springs. On board was Nolan Wells, headed for Horn Island, a barrier island roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast, reachable only by private boat, with no cell service, no shelters, and no facilities once you're there. By 11:14 a.m., they'd landed. What waited on that beach wasn't a small gathering. Investigators would later estimate close to 300 people were on Horn Island that day, scattered across boats and sandbars for one of the biggest informal 4th of July meetups on the Gulf Coast. That number matters. 300 witnesses should mean 300 versions of the same afternoon. Instead, it would mean almost the opposite, a day so crowded that no single account could cover it. By late morning, more boats kept arriving, and drinking was already underway among Wells's group, according to witnesses who were there. This wasn't unusual for the holiday. What made it unusual was what happened next. At some point that afternoon, Wells was reportedly in the company of a woman later identified publicly as Katie McCormack. How long they spoke and what was said depends entirely on who you ask. Her sister has pushed back hard on the public narrative, insisting the conversation was brief and that the family has fully cooperated with investigators. Nothing about this detail is settled, only that it's become one of the threads investigators are still pulling on. Then came the video. Footage from that day started circulating online, showing a young man yelling, appearing to be physically restrained by others around him. To a lot of people scrolling past it, the assumption was immediate. That's Nolan Wells, and something went wrong right there on camera. It wasn't him. The voice in that video belongs to Tristan Shepard, a friend of Wells since high school. Shepard has said publicly the footage shows him in an altercation with a stranger, not Wells, and not an argument about a phone, as some reports initially claimed. He says he was yelling at the people holding him back, trying to get free so he could keep fighting. It's a small correction with a big consequence. For weeks, that video shaped how people pictured Wells's final hours on the island, and it was never him at all. So if the video wasn't the moment something went wrong, what was? By early evening, Wells's friends were getting ready to leave the island. Wells wasn't with them, and that's where the timeline starts to fall apart. Somewhere between 4:30 and 6 o'clock that evening, Nolan Wells was seen for the last time. That's not an estimate we're rounding for effect. It's the actual range investigators have been stuck with, an hour and a half wide, because no two witnesses agree on when. In a case built on documentation and timestamps, this is the 1 hour and a half no one can pin down. Investigators have called it a material gap in the timeline, and more than a month later, it's still open. While that gap sat unresolved, something else was going wrong a few hundred yards offshore. A boat carrying part of Wells's friend group started taking on water. Its bilge pump, the system that pumps water back out before a boat sinks, had failed. 21-year-old Bart Edmiston Jr., who was nearby that day, boarded the struggling boat to help and towed it a short distance with his own before help arrived. That decision would later make him a witness in an investigation he had nothing to do with starting. Because the water kept coming in, someone on board called Sea-Tow, a private marine towing company, for an emergency pickup. The recording of that call would later become one of the most replayed pieces of audio in this entire case. We'll get into exactly what's on it soon. For now, what matters is what the caller told the dispatcher in the moment. Their bilge pump had stopped working, they were sinking, and they needed help fast. When the dispatcher asked how many people were on board, the answer was 7. 7 people. A boat filling with water. And Nolan Wells was not one of them. Before Sea-Tow could dispatch anyone, the tow captain got a second call. This one from a relative of the boat's owner, 17-year-old's grandfather, Jerry Adkerson. Adkerson told the captain the situation was under control. They didn't need help after all. The rescue call was stood down. The boat made it back to shore on its own. Wells didn't come with it. Multiple witnesses have since told investigators the same thing. When that boat left Horn Island, Nolan Wells was not on it. He was still on the island, hours after the point where his afternoon becomes difficult to trace, on a stretch of coastline with no cell service, no shelter, and no way to call for help of his own. Nobody has been able to say, on the record, exactly why he stayed. Nobody has agreed on exactly when the group last saw him standing there. What's clear is this. As a sinking boat pulled away from Horn Island that evening, carrying 7 people back toward the mainland, the 18-year-old who wasn't among them was never seen alive again. And it would be almost 2 full days before anyone started looking for him in earnest. By nightfall on July 4th, Nolan Wells had not called, had not texted, had not turned up at any dock, any house, any gathering point where the rest of his friends eventually landed. That night, his family reported him missing. For a family used to knowing where their son was, the silence itself became the emergency. Horn Island has no cell service, no shelter, no way for someone stranded there to reach anyone, and no way for anyone on the mainland to reach them back. If Nolan was still out there, he was on his own, in the dark, on a barrier island accessible only by boat. The search began the next morning. On July 5th, Mississippi's Department of Marine Resources launched drones to sweep the western side of the island from the air. It didn't last long. The heat that day was severe enough to damage the drone batteries mid-flight, cutting the search short before it could cover meaningful ground. Hours of daylight, lost to equipment failure. That's when the United Cajun Navy stepped in. The Volunteer Search and Rescue Group, led by Incident Commander Josh Gill, deployed its own resources to Horn Island, working alongside law enforcement to expand the search the drones couldn't finish. Boats, personnel, coordination with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, an operation built from scratch in real time for a teenager no one could locate. For Christine Wells Wansley, every hour without an answer stretched longer than the last. She had said goodbye to her son 2 nights earlier. Now she was waiting on updates from a search team combing a remote island for the boy who told her he loved her before he left. A full day passed, then most of another. 2 days. That's how long it took before anyone had an answer of any kind. Not confirmation, not relief, just the moment everything shifted from a search to something else entirely. Because early on the morning of July 6th, someone finally found something on the western tip of Horn Island, and nothing about what came next would happen quickly or simply for the family waiting to hear it. At 8:45 on the morning of July 6th, a U.S. Park Service ranger found a body on the western tip of Horn Island. He was still wearing his swim trunks. Word moved fast, but it moved incomplete. Nobody told Christine Wells Wansley whose body had been found. She didn't need them to. Before deputies could reach her with confirmation, she was already in her car, headed toward the coordination point where searchers had been operating for 2 days. Josh Gill, the Cajun Navy's incident commander, was already there. He'd later described the moment Christine arrived, how she got out of the vehicle and went straight to him, how the two of them ended up sitting on the ground together while she waited for someone in uniform to make it official. Her husband, Elmore Wansley, stood over them, quiet, present, his hand on both their shoulders. That's when the sheriff walked over, not with a name, just the fact that a body had been recovered and where it would be taken next. From there, the family was escorted to the coroner's office, a small conference room, not the clinical setting most people picture. The coroner walked in within moments of everyone sitting down. Based on physical description alone, he told them he believed it was Nolan. He also told them something else, something the Jackson County Sheriff's Department would put in an official statement that same day. No foul play was suspected, but belief wasn't confirmation. The state needed more before it could put Nolan Wells' name on a death certificate. Investigators couldn't rely on a visual identification or fingerprints. The condition of the body ruled both out. So Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lynn Jr. turned to 2 other methods, DNA and dental records. The next day, both came back matching. Nolan Wells, 18 years old, was confirmed dead. If you've made it this far, you already know this story doesn't end with a confirmed identity. Subscribe now, because the next chapter is where the official version of events starts falling apart. There was one more detail from that first examination, one the coroner mentioned almost in passing, an area of red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head. At the time, nobody in that conference room treated it as significant. The sheriff's office had already said there was no sign of foul play. The family had just lost their son to what looked, on the surface, like a tragic accident. Nobody in that room knew yet how much weight those 5 words, red discoloration on the back of the head, were about to carry. 12 days after Nolan Wells was pulled from the water, his family buried him. The funeral was held July 20th at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, the same community that had cheered him on from the stands every Friday night. Entertainer Tyler Perry reportedly covered the costs, a private note of support instead of a public statement, the kind of gesture that only underscored the size of what was already becoming a national story. Alongside Perry's support, a public fundraiser for the family had already passed $230,000 in donations, proof of how far this case had traveled beyond Ocean Springs. Because by then, this had stopped being a local case. The Wells family had retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump, and Crump wasn't willing to accept the sheriff's office's account without a second opinion. He arranged an independent autopsy paid for by former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick and performed by Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist and president of the National Medical Association. By the time Mitchell received the body, the state's own autopsy was already finished. The remains had been transported more than 800 miles to Washington, D.C., nearly a week later, already showing significant decomposition before he even began. Mitchell's preliminary findings, released weeks after that, delivered a verdict nobody wanted and everybody had feared. Cause and manner of death, undetermined. Not accident, not homicide, undetermined, pending further investigation. That word alone was enough to reignite the case nationally, months after the sheriff's office had already called it settled. But the full report is more complicated than that single line suggests. And if you want the real picture, you need both sides of it. Mitchell's report also stated something that gets left out of most of the headlines. No fractures, no deep tissue injuries, no lacerations of the skin anywhere on Nolan's body. Whatever happened to him, it left no obvious sign of a violent physical attack. Then there was the red discoloration first mentioned back at the coroner's office. Mitchell couldn't determine its cause. But outside forensic pathologists reviewing the case have pointed out that this kind of discoloration is also consistent with something far less dramatic: ordinary decomposition, or lividity, the natural pooling of blood after death. Two very different explanations sitting in the same unresolved space. The bigger complication came from what Mitchell didn't have access to at all. Parts of Nolan's throat and neck structures were missing from the body by the time it reached him for independent review. The state medical examiner's office had retained that tissue for its own further examination, something outside experts describe as standard forensic practice, not evidence of concealment. But standard or not, it left one door open that Mitchell couldn't close. Without those structures, he couldn't rule out an injury to the neck as a contributing factor. And there was still one more result the family didn't have: toxicology. As of the most recent reporting, those results still haven't been released. While the medical questions sat open, the legal ones started multiplying. Two of Wells's friends were reportedly charged with evidence tampering, accused of failing to fully report or comply with what investigators needed from them. Neither charge answers what happened to Nolan. Both point to how much friction had built up around a case that was supposed to be a straightforward drowning, which brings up a detail that's harder to explain away than any of the forensics. Jackson County, according to records obtained through an open request, has not recorded a single drowning death at Horn Island in 6 years. Not one. On an island surrounded by water, visited by hundreds of boaters every summer, for 6 straight years, Nolan Wells could swim. And somehow, on the one night no witness can agree on, in the 1 hour and a half nobody can pin down, that record was broken. That call to sea tow, the one made while the boat was sinking, was never meant to be public. Then Mississippi's Department of Marine Resources released it, and the internet did what the internet does with unclear audio and an unresolved death. It started replaying every second, hunting for something it could hold on to. TMZ ran with an enhanced version of the recording, one they say pulled out words buried beneath the original noise. Online, people began pointing to specific moments. A voice some believed was asking whether someone was dead, another apparently saying a name, others insisting they could make out instructions to check on someone and get them to wake up. None of it was clean. None of it was confirmed. All of it spread anyway. Digital forensics expert Robert Freed reviewed both versions for a televised interview and found something the viral clips didn't mention. TMZ's enhanced audio ran 20 seconds longer than the original recording, with a completely different digital fingerprint. Freed didn't call it fake. He called it altered enough that its reliability couldn't be verified. And he made a point worth remembering. Once people are told what to listen for, their brains tend to hear it, whether it's actually there or not. He admitted his own mind went straight to the suggested words the first time he heard the claims, before he'd even done the analysis himself. Away from the audio, a friend named Javon Williams pushed back on another piece of the narrative entirely: the idea that Nolan simply chose to stay behind. He told reporters that's not the version of Nolan he knew. In his experience, staying back while his friends left just wasn't something Nolan did. By this point, the case had stopped being regional news. The NAACP had gotten involved. So had the Congressional Black Caucus, pushing publicly for federal oversight of the investigation. And so had Reverend Al Sharpton, whose involvement would soon collide with the legal team, already representing 3 of Wells's own friends. Because that's where this story takes its sharpest turn. Warren Hudson, Jack Spatalo, and Morgan Seymour, 3 friends who were with Wells before he disappeared, filed an intent to sue letter accusing Sharpton of defamation. Their claim, that his public remarks implied they'd committed murder, hindered the investigation, or tampered with evidence. Their attorneys pointed to phone records showing Hudson called both Christine Wells Wansley and the U.S. Coast Guard within hours of realizing Nolan hadn't come back, staying on that Coast Guard line for over 20 minutes trying to get help. That threat of a lawsuit matters here for one reason above all others. Months into national coverage, hundreds of hours of speculation, and a case pulling in civil rights leaders and members of Congress, nobody official has ever named a suspect. No one has been charged in connection with Nolan's death. The murder implication Sharpton is accused of making has no backing in the actual investigation, at least not yet. And the 3 friends fighting that implication in court say it never should have existed in the first place. Underneath all of it sat one more problem, and it wasn't about who said what. Christine Wells Wansley started publicly flagging AI-generated videos circulating online, fabricated clips designed to look like real footage tied to the case, including one falsely claiming she'd lost her job. A mother, grieving in public, now also correcting fake content invented in her son's name. If you want to see where this actually goes when the noise clears, subscribe now, because the next update is coming straight from the grand jury. Because underneath the audio, the accusations, and the lawsuits threatening to fly in every direction, one basic fact hadn't moved an inch since July 6th. Nobody could say, on the record, what actually happened to Nolan Wells on that island. The threats didn't stop with words online. They turned into federal cases. Edward James Porter was charged after allegedly calling two witnesses multiple times, threatening to kill them and their families, telling one he knew exactly where they lived. Michelle Francine Edwards was charged separately, accused of placing bomb threats to a county clerk's office and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, repeating the same line over and over, "The clock is ticking." And Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarce was charged for allegedly sending a bomb threat aimed at a judge connected to the case. None of these three know Nolan Wells. None of them know his family, and none of them were anywhere near that friend group on Horn Island. They're not suspects in his death. They're proof of how far this case has traveled beyond the people who actually lived it. Strangers, threatening strangers, over a story that still doesn't have an ending. Meanwhile, the actual investigation kept moving, just not in public. The state's official autopsy was completed weeks ago. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath has confirmed the results won't be released to the public. They're headed to a grand jury instead. The same process used for nearly every death in the county that isn't ruled natural or accidental. Separately, the United Cajun Navy released its own 22-page analysis, compiling GPS data, witness accounts, photos, and video from that day. Vice President Brian Trasher was clear about what it is and isn't. Not a criminal investigation, just a compilation, offered to help close the same material gap that's defined this case since July. Even with all that data laid out in one place, the gap is still there. On August 19th, Nolan Wells would have turned 19. Instead, hundreds gathered at Greater St. John AME Church in Biloxi for a vigil in his honor, with Dr. Jamal Bryant delivering the keynote. Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network held a parallel national prayer vigil the same night, a birthday marked without him. Christine Wells Wansley hasn't stopped pushing. She's issued new subpoenas seeking additional CETO communications tied to the day her son disappeared, still chasing records the public hasn't seen. Here's where that leaves this case, plainly. No one has been charged in connection with Nolan Wells' death. Not one person. The investigation hasn't reached a grand jury yet. And until it does, there is no official answer to what happened on that island between 4:30 and 6 o'clock that evening. This case isn't closed. It isn't close to closed. We'll be here when it moves. Subscribe now, because when that grand jury reaches a decision, you'll hear it here first, before the headlines catch up.